Well, this is an album that definitely takes its time, and even though it's been out for a number of weeks, I needed to take my time with it just to make sure that I was really getting each nook and cranny of this. So, yeah, let's dive in. Leaving Meaning by Swans. So, Swans, they're a great outfit. They started their career in the early 80s with this no wave kind of a sound, revolutionizing what it meant for like an experimental outfit, focusing in on instrumental crescendos. They disbanded in 1997, only to kind of resurface back in 2010. And from 2010, after My Father Will Guide Me Up a Rope to the Sky, because post-rock loves their really mouthful titles, they did a 3-album set. They did The Seer, To Be Kind, and Glowing Man. And since 2010, they've been releasing an album once every other year, which is quite a feat when you realize the length of these guys. Like, most of these albums are double discers, with songs ranging from 7 to 30 minutes in length. And that perked my ears up. That got me very excited. I love To Be Kind. I also love The Glowing Man. The Seer's, I need to be in the right mood for The Seer, but The Seer is also really good. So these 3 back-to-back-to-back albums just blew me away. They were still able to orchestrate these large crescendos, taking their time, as I said, into the 30-minute mark, to create these grand Goliaths of sound. And this is almost what I would classify as like experimental sound rock, because they're very interested at creating these crescendo moments of just a wall of noise, like almost noise rock would be a good identifier on here. So after The Glowing Man in 2016, they finally did away with that era. And with Leaving Meaning, we're entering in a new era. We're entering in this new dimension of Swans. And I was actually looking forward. I was interested to see where the band was going to grow, where the lead guy of Michael Jura, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, is going to kind of put his vision. Because I found with each of the albums up to this point, there was almost like a clear-cut vision of what he wanted each album to be. So I was really excited to see what Leaving Meaning would be. Leaving Meaning being a little bit more on the optimistic side, I was really excited to hear some more positive sounds on these albums, because most of the time these sounds have been not necessarily the most optimistic in terms of scope, in terms of range. So I was pretty excited about this. And in the one hand, I feel like this is a transition album. I feel like this is an album where they're trying to figure out kind of where they want to go and how they want to do it. Now, this, like the albums in the past, are 2 discs, ranging a total time of like an hour and a half, of about 90 minutes. And that's a lot to get through. I find I have to be in just the right mood, but once I'm in that right mood, I can't help but gush about the music that's found within it. As I said, this feels much more like a transition album. And even though this is on 2 discs with a halfway point, I actually feel like this is more of a 3-movement suite. I feel like this album is broken up into 3 distinct parts, with 4 tracks within each. So for how I feel, it starts off with 4 more optimistic tracks. It starts off with Hums and Aniline, and I feel like Hums and Aniline, which comes out to about 7 and a bit minutes worth of music, are much more optimistic. And this is kind of what I was hoping with the album as a whole. Hums and Aniline are almost heavenly, like we're feeling very divine. We've got much more of like a choir of sound as opposed to a wall of sound, and it feels very welcoming. It feels very like the doors opening up and the band is welcoming you into their living rooms just to kind of play around, which is a little bit different than their past couple of albums, which was much more of like a do not enter sign. But then we come into the first large track of The Hanging Man, and on this track in particular, it does kind of feel something like we would have found within The Glowing Man. Like, this is kind of the longer stretch of about 10 and a half minutes. We've got a longer crescendo piece coming onto, but I also feel like we were kind of testing the territory as well. Like, it doesn't really have that same build up that many of the tracks that we'll have eventually do, but it does kind of feel like kind of a testing of the waters, right? And then we come into Amnesia, the 4th track, and this kind of ends that first suite. It's interesting because it does feel like a closing track in some sense. Like, it's very rocky in terms of like very like it feels like you're lost on the waves, and in that it feels like you're being lulled to sleep. But like with Michael's vocals come in, and it's very that rough, that very like raw, it feels like very unsettling and very dark and very menacing. So the two play around with one another very well. So then we come into like the second movement in my mind, where we've got the title track of Leaving Meaning, the about 11 and a half minutes. Then we go into Sunfucker, which is a 10-minute track. So these are kind of like two big ones, Cathedral of Heavens, and I feel like the nub is this otherworldly track. It's the longest track at just over 12 minutes long, and I love submerging myself into the nub. Now I do feel like even though the nub might be one of the stronger moments on this album, there's not a whole lot of build-ups that happen. There's a lot of like exploring the soundscapes, exploring the territory, seeing what comes, what works, what doesn't. There's a lot of experimentation, but not a whole lot of like big crescendo. Not at least that we find within the Sunfucker, where I feel like within this track, there's a big crescendo that happens. We have a lot of that really angsty soundscapes that we have from Michael's vocal work. And when we get into that like halfway mark of this track, it's just like unrelenting. It's just like and I love how we come in from this chaos from that first part where it's tightening the gears, tightening the coils, and we never really get a release. All we get is like this slip, and then the coil just unrounds itself within these cogs. It's so gnarly in it, and I love it when I'm listening to this on like a really, really good set of headphones, and like I'm feeling this like coming in. It's great, which is really good because Leaving Meaning I felt was just wandering of the landscape a little bit, very similar to like say the Hanging Man, where there's a lot of testing of the waters, very much kind of actually like the nub, where I'm not really feeling where the song wants to go or what the song wants to be. It just feels very much like an experiment. Cathedrals of Heaven is they're playing in this really large cathedral, and it's this like absence of the divine, and I really like that kind of concept. So then we come into the final part, at least in my mind. I can also see how the nub would start like the final piece, but I actually feel like the final piece starts with It's Coming, It's Real. And It's Coming, It's Real might be my favorite track off of this album. Even though I was really hoping for this really big meaty crescendo at the end of it, it still does a really great job of building this up. And this is that more optimistic sound that I was really, really craving within this album. It's got a lot more of these optimistic feels. The sounds are more in a major tone. Really interesting kind of play out. Then we're introduced into the last three tracks of Some New Things, What Is This, and Phantom Limbs. And these tracks are a little bit on the smaller side in terms of the length, ranging between 6.5 or even 6 minutes to 7 minutes. And it does a really nice way of kind of ending the album off, but at no point do I feel like we ever really get those high points as, say, Sunfucker does, or It's Coming, It's Real. Because I love how almost divine that It's Coming, It's Real. It's almost like that Cathedral of Heaven where they leave the cathedral and they go out into nature and they find this is where the divine is. And so I kind of feel it in that way. And the last three tracks are just more of this kind of experimentation, trying to see what works. How do they really want to end this album off? So I've been really loving this album as a whole. I feel like this is a great kind of sit down and listen with a really nice glass of wine type of an album. The more you listen to it, the more you get out of it as well. It's a really great time. Probably not as good as, say, like To Be Kind, but I do think it is a little bit better than their last work of The Glowing Man, because I'm kind of seeing where they're going to go with this album, and I'm really, really excited about that. So overall, this is one that I would definitely download. I don't know if I would quite pick it up in physical format. I think I might need a little bit more time with it before I want to invest in it, but it's definitely one that I would download for sure. I think the main issue that I have with it is that it didn't deviate itself enough from the trilogy albums of The Seer, To Be Kind, and The Glowing Man. I think it needed to take just another couple of steps away. And that's my biggest issue with the album, and that's not even that big of an issue, really. I wanted it to be more of its separate piece, and it did feel kind of like a transition album. And that's about it. Still loved it. Highly recommend it if you're into this experimental post-rock, noise rock type of outfit. What did you guys think of Leaving Meaning? Because this one definitely left some meaning for me. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know of your own comments by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, out.